Podcast, fastest hour of the week. And I know, as I am, and my two guests, many of you that's watching tonight are super excited and relieved. Election season is over. And most of us, I know if you're watching this podcast, you voted for Donald Trump, and he won last night. But not only that victory, we've got the House and the Senate, I believe. So there's good things coming. But I wanted to have just a post-election, kind of a reflection on some things that happened, things we've seen. And I brought in two people that's no strangers to the show. We have Megan Almond with us, and she has been on the show several times and just won the at-large school district seat for our Stanley County schools. So that's awesome. And then we've got Jason Phibbs. Can't say enough about him, and the intellectual stuff that he brings to the table with not only biblical but also the governmental side, different things like that. It's just obvious that we're just three people that actually do our own research, where a lot of people depend on news media and everything. But I just wanted to have an open discussion a little bit about a couple different topics tonight. But the first one I kind of wanted to go over was because this has been a big thing. Many of us believe that in 2020 the election was stolen because the numbers still don't add up. But this year one of the big things was election integrity. And I was looking over a few things, and, right before the election happened, the Supreme Court had ruled that it was illegal for non-citizens to vote. That come down the pipeline. And I think that affected Virginia. I believe it was, yeah. Then a federal judge in Iowa had ruled in favor of some poll workers that were wanting to challenge over 2,000 ballots that were in question of people that may be non-citizens, may not. A federal judge in Arizona ruled that the election officials must hand over 1.2 million unknown voter. They were on the voter rolls, but they were unknown status. They had to turn those over. Milwaukee announced that it would recount 30 to 40,000 absentee ballots. Pennsylvania had numerous issues, as always. Nobody, leave it to Pennsylvania, including they had ballot issues. Then they also had the machines were not doing something right, so they were wanting to put the ballots in lock boxes and take them off-site and count them. They had gas leaks. Georgia had bomb threats. Cali had power outages. All of these things just happened at the election polling places, But we still see that even in that, there was a lot of exposure this time. It was kind of like we kind of learned from 2020 that, elections can be safe and fair, but you have to watch people. So I think the election integrity was better this year. I'm not going to say it was 100%. We may not can ever get it 100%, but it's still, I think it was better this time. There's still, there's still things that don't add up, but at any rate, what's some stuff within your thoughts, Megan, on the integrity this go around and maybe moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I've been listening to all the stuff that's just been trying to come about as well. But, watching the election process last night, tuned in, tuned out, because it would consume me if I did it the whole time.
Yeah.
But I was just amazed that even though, like you said, it wasn't 100%, God's hand was on it.
Right.
And it amazed me how smooth it went.
Yeah.
Because every single time I tuned in, I was like, what's going to happen here? If I lay down and go to sleep, I'm going to wake up with 100,000 ballots being added here. But but the Lord just, I think, he had his hand on it the whole time, and it was a miracle in my opinion.
Yeah.
And so I am thankful for that. But it's amazing what the Democrats are willing to do to try to win a vote.
Yeah.
Not the people's vote.
Yeah, that's kind of what I look at. What about you, Jason?
Yeah, I mean, I like Megan and probably like many other people, I think we all had a little bit of PTSD
Yeah.
from the last
Yes.
election, and so when things were moving in the right, things were looking really good
Yeah.
late into the evening. But at the same time, you're just like, okay, well, am I going to go to bed and then I'm going to wake up and everything's going to be changed? So I think you kind of alluded to the 2020 election, and there was a chart making the rounds today on social media from Zero Hedge showing that, in the 2012 and the 2016 elections, the Democrat candidate got around 60 million votes. So Obama and Hillary got about 60 million. Then Joe Biden gets 80 million votes in 2020, and then Kamala last night, in what is supposed to be the most important election of our lifetime, right? Everybody was agreed on that.
Yeah.
She gets 60 million votes. So, 15 to 20 million Democrats, we're supposed to believe, just didn't show up yesterday.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. From a North Carolina perspective, the exit polls showed that only 42% of the people in the exit polls were very confident in our election system. And I think, to me, that's the biggest challenge going forward, is that you said it right, Megan. We were blessed by God last night that it was such an overwhelming victory that there isn't anything to question.
Yeah.
So that's good for the country.
Yeah.
No matter who you voted for.
Yeah.
Because it's going to be much harder for people to want to stir up trouble or whatever, because it's just going to look silly. Especially since he not only won the Electoral College but also the popular vote.
Yeah.
But that's been a common thing, right?
Yeah.
This Electoral College thing is a farce and all. So that was big. So yes, I think the big thing here is that we've got to have a reconciliation of what happened. Are all the systems in check? And then, too, it takes too long for a lot of these states to count votes.
Yeah.
You got Florida down there that's, third or fourth most populous state in the country. They're in 2 time zones, and they're done by like 9 o'clock.
9 o'clock.
And then you got, they were saying this morning, Arizona, which has been closed now for over 12 hours, and this was as of like noon today.
Yeah.
They still were only reporting like 50% of the vote.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So it's that kind of stuff that builds the doubt.
Yeah. And that's where we were talking about a little earlier. I'm not necessarily against early voting. I definitely wasn't this go around. I think that was a benefit for us as Republicans. Most of the time in elections prior, the early vote was always very large turnout by Democrats, very low by Republicans. This election cycle, it was reversed. But I've always been. It was like I said, I'm patriotic. Election day, let's do it. Let's get it done. But there has to be. I feel like with the electronic stuff, we've seen places where these people were literally touching on Trump's and J.D. Vance, and it wouldn't go through. If they would touch down below it at Kamala Harris, it would light up. Some would touch Trump, it would still light up Harris.
Was that the Dominion machine?
Yeah, that was Dominion machines. Then there was, I think, in Pennsylvania or somewhere, they had the regular ballots like we had here in North Carolina, where you color in the circle. But the problem is there was already in the printing part of it, there was a dot right in the middle of Kamala Harris and Waltz. So when it's scanning, it's going to automatically throw the vote. So there's got to be ways that these things can be simplified more, because even with the coloring, I'm thinking we live in 2024 now. Can we not come up with something a little?
I think that's where your state board of elections, holding them accountable, but it also starts in your local board of elections. Right. Now, I will say, I think Stanley County actually has a good board of elections.
Yeah.
Right.
When I had my recount done 2 years ago, I mean, I watched the whole process. There was nothing that was shady.
Right.
And I was very surprised, because that's the first time. So if you're not, in a small town like us, you're like Georgia.
Yeah.
You got to get involved in your local board of elections to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. Because if you're holding them accountable on a local level, then you're eventually going to hold them on a state level too.
Right.
So
my wife and I, we were talking about this the other night. After we went and voted yesterday, went to our local precinct. A lot of these little old ladies, running things that are there every time you go.
Yeah.
And one of the things we were saying is, who's going to take their place? they're not going to live forever.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
so I think to your point, Megan, that's just one of the easy opportunities that people in every county, in every place in the country can get involved, learn about the process, be a poll watcher, be an election day worker, whatever. There's plenty of opportunities to get involved, and that's part of citizenship.
Yeah.
And that's what we've lost. We've lost this. People don't feel a responsibility
Right.
to take care of the system,
Yeah.
and then they complain when the system's not
Exactly.
right.
Yeah, I mean, that was, like with myself, here in Oakboro, I was in the volunteer fire service for 22 years, and and then being involved, growing up in church and being in church, I think those two things help you keep that sense of, there's other stuff I would like to be doing, but some of these things, it's necessary that we mess up our schedules.
Yeah.
Because I believe what's happening, like I said, eventually some of these people, none of these younger people want to go sit at polls, but at the same time, like if we don't have people wanting to do it, then you're leaving the whole election process up to computers and who knows who.
And honestly, I think that falls to our local GOP.
Yeah.
I mean, what can we do if we're if we have the letter R behind our name? What is our local party doing to help get these kids, going out? I think it's actually Cabarrus County. They have a youth GOP.
Oh, wow.
And like they're getting the kids to go into the schools and teach other kids on what I think that's it.
Yeah.
Begins.
That's a great idea.
It begins with the youth in the next generation.
Yeah.
I think the other thing, speaking of election integrity, was the ballot measure last night, the constitutional amendment.
Yeah.
So that was basically to have citizen-only voting, right? You have to be 18 years of age at least and be a citizen and all that to be able to vote. And that passed overwhelmingly. It was like 77%.
Yeah.
So that, once again, not only do you have voter ID, which is passed in this state, I think spent twice, it's passed as a constitutional amendment, and then you have the citizen-only voting now. So the people in North Carolina, even though if you look at the exit polls, we're actually a pretty moderate state. Like, we're not really, we are purple.
Yeah.
But even in our state, we're overwhelmingly saying, look, only people who should vote should be able to vote, right? We can all agree nobody wants people cheating. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, that to me, and that, I guess, I think the majority, and of course America spoke, and the majority of people understand that. But you get this whole different narrative and push from mainstream media because they work for the deep state or the people behind the people, more or less. But, in the United States, to buy alcohol, you have to have an ID. To buy tobacco products, you have to have an ID. To drive a car, you have to have an ID. To get on a plane, to get through security, you have to have an ID. All of these things you have to have IDs for, but yet to vote, no. Just give us a random name, tell us an address, we'll put you in, go vote. And that's where, I think when we put the reins on that, then you're going to see the election process will get a little more simpler, and you're not going to have all these absentee ballots and mail-in ballots. Why? Because you have to show up. Now, I get it. If you can prove, hey, I'm going to be out of the country due to work or military this time, you get to vote earlier. You can do the mail-in. If you're a shut-in or home, I get it. You can have mail, but to blatantly just throw these things out like they're doing, it was like, you can't,
Yeah.
I know you got other topics, but just the last thing I'll say on this is that I think one of the things that has been frustrating for me is that government acts, or a lot of government officials act like it's our responsibility as the people to prove to them that there's something wrong with the process, instead of their responsibility to prove to me that there's not anything wrong with it.
Yeah.
Right? The ownership's on them. They're running the process. It's up to them to prove to us, the people, that it's a secure election.
Yeah, and that kind of, I'll talk about this and then we'll move to the next one. But, a lot of churches and a lot of just people, because I get a lot of flack for being a pastor that's, unashamed to preach politics and the truth, line it up with the Bible and preach it from the pulpit or here on the podcast. But, I've had a lot of throwback people throwing out Romans 13:1, the Romans 13:1, Romans 13:1. And, when I really began to study that, I got to, because you have to look at it in the context of when it was written. And that's dealing with Rome. That's dealing with that government, the way they governed. And then you can't take Romans 13:1 and apply it to the United States of America, because the buzzword in our mainstream media is it's a threat to democracy. Democracy, democracy, democracy. We're a constitutional republic for the people, by the people. So Romans 13:1 is referring to us as the ruling authority, because the government should answer to us. They work for us, by us, and that's kind of what they need to answer to us. And that, I think, we as a people need to hold people more accountable. Quit getting so busy in our lives that we forget to make the phone call or say, hey, you need to check up on this. Why are you doing that? Make it where it's more transparent, And I believe even as an elected official, sometimes you may have to push through something maybe you yourself don't really like, but if the bulk of the people that put you there says, this is what we want, that's your job.
That's right.
And I think when we get some
as
things.
Long as it's morally
right.
upright.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for throwing that one in there. But that, I guess that kind of leads me in. That's where you talk about morality. And I think that's where we are seeing the big shift and the separation between the Republican Party. And again, the Republican Party is by no means perfect. They're no means the Savior. That's Jesus Christ and Him alone. But that platform lines up biblically more than the Democrats do. And when you look at the Democrat Party now, and you look at what their talking points have been, what their platform, what they've run on, which is more or less hatred for Trump with no policy. But we see them now in a full panic mode. That they're worrying about their lives ending, but yet because of their hateful rhetoric, Trump had how many assassination attempts? 3?
At least 2.
At least 2.
At least 2 for sure.
Yeah, other Republicans and people that supported him, MAGA people, got beat in the streets, harassed, people lost their jobs. And, now what's amazing me is you see these people now on social media, they're coming out and saying, oh, now we just need to unite. We all need to just be in unity. And I know that is the Christian thing to say. But my problem with that is I question your relationship with Christ if you voted for her to start with. So we're not in the same boat. And you just got done calling me a homophobe, a bigot, a misogynist, Hitler, like we talked about, all of these names, you've called me all of those. But now, okay, let's unite.
You can't be in unity with unrighteousness.
Exactly.
It's impossible, because righteousness cannot go with unrighteousness.
Right.
And so there's no such thing as unity with that.
Yep.
And I think that's a big challenge about where we are as a country. Is the fact is that we are very divided.
Yeah.
Even with the election results as they were, because while Trump won an overwhelming victory in the Electoral College,
right.
A lot of those states that he won were we're talking 2 points here, 2 points there, so the country is very divided. We shouldn't ignore that. And it's over ideology. We are on very different sides of the spectrum, and there's no reconciling those things. How do you reconcile one side that wants to be able to kill a baby anytime they want, and another side that says we shouldn't?
Yeah.
Where's the unity there? You can't. So that's going to be our challenge moving forward. Is for us to be able to move forward as a country, and this is for any country. You have to have a common set of beliefs and values that everybody agrees on. And from the foundation of the country, that used to be the Constitution.
Right.
But see, now we have an entire party, and you heard this on mainstream media, where and I think it was on CNN, I forget the exact, but this was several months ago, but somebody was talking, and they talked about how our rights come from God. And the CNN host basically laughed at them as though that was a silly thing, because to them, rights come from the government.
Yeah.
Well, you can't. It's impossible to share a nation with people that believe so differently. So that's going to be our challenge going forward: is how do we? One side's going to win out,
Yeah.
That's the bottom line.
Yeah.
It's not gonna. We're not just gonna live like this. It's just like with slavery.
Yeah.
Right. We got to the point as a nation where we're like, we can't keep going like this.
Right.
There's got to be a decision where we as a nation say we're going to be like this or we're not going to be like this.
Yeah.
And thank God we made the right decision.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that, I rippled some feathers. I made a post the other day that said the same pastors that are quiet on political issues are the same ones that were quiet during the Holocaust. Mm-hmm. Same issues. People, we don't want to get involved in this, but it's like, because we don't, our ideologies, and what's that is culture. Mm-hmm. And until we change the culture back to one nation under God, because Christ is the only one that can unify us. Yeah. Does that mean everybody's going to be saved? No. But we get back to a place where we can agree to disagree. It's this hateful rhetoric, though, like the New York Times, I don't know if y'all saw this, their headline today was America makes a perilous decision or choice. Mm-hmm. That's not a positive headline.
Right.
And then I never watch it, but I had to watch some of it today. I always tell people here that if you want to lose brain cells, if you feel like you have to, watch The View.
Oh, I knew it was coming.
Watch The View.
I knew it was coming.
Because they have, this is where I guess people say I'm a male chauvinist, but you've got way too much estrogen trying to tell you how to run the world. But that Sunny Holston of The View, she give this very dramatic, heartfelt, all but tears speech about, how she's in fear for her mother and she's in fear for her children and her daughter. And she made this remark, and what's so bad is people will believe this and there's no thought process. She said, my daughter today has less rights than I do. Well, if you're alive and she's alive and you're both females, how do you, but it's this whole thing of they're going after, women's health care because that's the whole abortion thing, and, she give this whole long speech, and what's so, I don't know, I guess asinine to me is, if I'm not mistaken, this Sunny, she was an attorney she was some kind of law. I'm not sure. She knows law, but yet said what she said, knowing that that's a load of crap. Nobody has lost more rights just because somebody else went in the office.
Well, that's where there's people that can think for themselves, and then there's people that they can't do that. They grab from what's being streamed or indoctrinated into them, and they can't think for themselves. So you see that line of people that, they're going to watch the news, they're going to follow this fad or whatever. They're never going to think a single thought to themselves, why do I think that? Mm-hmm. And I think that's where we are in a nation, for parents teaching that to your children, this is the Bible. This is the groundwork. This is where we start from.
Yeah.
Ask the questions and think for yourself. Like, why does this happen? Or why is this happening? Or why do we need to do this? Don't just take my word for it. Go in there and dive in and learn and glean from that.
Yeah.
But people have a hard time doing that these days.
Well, and it's about worldview.
Mm.
Yeah.
And that's why the church plays such an important role, is because the church, the job of the church is to teach a biblical worldview, which then is the lens that we look at every problem and situation. And when you don't have that, when a nation forgets God, like we have, you end up with chaos, right?
Yes.
It's just whatever you want. It's whatever you feel.
Yeah.
And, I think the good thing is that obviously the Democrats' position lost, right? They were very outspoken. They didn't try to hide a whole lot.
Yeah.
They called half the nation outright Nazis.
Yeah.
And there was a rejection of that, thankfully. I think the other thing we have to remember, though, is those of us on the right, is had the election gone the other way,
right,
we would have been in an equal panic.
Oh, yes.
And that, again, just goes to speak to the divide that we're at.
Yeah.
And so it's a very tenuous situation, and I think it's going to be challenged no matter who's in charge.
Yeah. Yeah, and that that's the whole thing, and we keep seeming to, even in all the different topics we bounce back to it, is it's the morality issue, and it's a lot of people, like you say, want the government to tell me what the laws are, the government to tell me what's right and what's wrong. But when you do that, now we're subject to man determining what's right for mankind. That goes all the way back to when Adam ate the apple. He was now saying, I'm God, I don't need you. I can be God all by myself. Not realizing that we were created in his image and likeness. We were already lowercase gods, but in his image. But it goes all the way to now is, how can you have morality without a higher power that's above human saying what's right and what's wrong? Because between us three, we could have a conversation, and I can guarantee you before the end of the night, there's going to be some things that's right for you that's not for me. And, but does that make it, our morality, when you put it in man's hands, has now dropped, so that now abortion, that's women's health care. How is that women's health care? You're murdering a child. But that's the way they're spinning these things. So, it is that the church has to get back in, because the Democrat side, they're keeping that narrative pushing. They're not stopping, that's that whole plight. Y'all probably seen those commercials in North Carolina that the Kamala Harris team paid for, about the woman in tears about how she had to get on a plane and fly by herself to a state she'd never been to, all this stuff. And the reality of abortion is less than 1% have abortions because it could kill the mother. Well, to me, when that happens, that's not abortion. That, that's an emergency procedure to save the life of the mother. Because there are times when, what's a miscarriage? That's the body's natural way of aborting a child that was going to.
The child is already passed.
Exactly.
There's also another misconception that abortion is the main topic, but what I hear the church as a whole say, and this is what bewilders me a little bit, is, well, America's not mentioned in the Bible. That's what I hear. Okay, well, that is true. But we're in the here and the now, and we were born in such a time as this, that we were given God-given rights. Our country was founded on these God-given principles, and if we don't act in the here and the now to speak for the unborn, to do things, then it's that whole idea, well, America's not mentioned. I mean, are you just supposed to roll over and die?
Yeah.
Yes, I'm waiting for Jesus to come back, but I'm going to do something while I'm waiting.
Yeah.
The church has got to step up, and they have got to start speaking out for the unborn. And even, if you don't agree that you're supposed to get involved in local politics, if you're more than likely your children in the public sector, in education. My situation is a little different. I literally have one in public, one in private, one in homeschool.
Oh, wow.
Life is busy.
Yeah.
But the beautiful thing is there's school choice, and as a mother who believes that Jesus is coming back, I'm going to do everything I can to fight for my children in the here and the now, and not be complacent, because we're in the situation that we are because we're being complacent.
Absolutely. And, that's the whole thing, is with all the rhetoric that the Dems are pushing, even like Rachel Maddow said today, that we are in an extreme state of, national emergency. So you've got all the people that listen to her that are now going into a fear mode. And, Morning Joe Scarborough, anyway, he said himself today that Americans are racist, misogynist, because we don't want a woman president. Just because we didn't vote for her does not mean we don't want a woman president. I'm not against a woman president, but most nations right now, if you put a woman in president, there's Arab nations that will not even have anything to do with her because she's a woman. Where does that put us in relationship with that nation? You know, I'm not, hey, I'm not saying we can't have one, but to me, it seems like until maybe some things change in other nations, it needs to be a man, but even if it is a woman, it's got to be the qualifications. And I'm so tired of, and I think this did backfire on them because even Obama went out and he messed up with the black vote because he basically told black men that they were ignorant and that they wasn't with the flow if they didn't vote them. And the black men took an offense to it this time. It woke them up to go, wait a minute. You don't have a right to tell me that I'm not black and I'm not smart and intelligent because I don't vote the way you want me to vote. So we've seen all these things. And then the last thing, I don't know if either one of y'all saw this, but Representative that Jamie Raskin, did y'all hear what he said?
You talking about a few months ago?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And this is where we're facing. We're not. I believe Trump will be inaugurated, but I believe there's going to be hell between now and then. But Jamie Raskin, and I wrote it down. It's quoted, but it's a video. You can pull it up and watch it. But he said himself with a microphone to an audience. He said, "Let people vote for Trump. Let him vote if that's who they want to vote for." But he said, "Irregardless, we will not certify the election. He may be elected, but he will never be inaugurated." And what they're going to do is try to use the 14th Amendment, Section 3, because of the insurrection, which has been proven he had nothing to do with, but the media still has their talking points. So a lot of people are going, well, he's an insurrectionist.
They're trying to cause a civil war is what they're trying
Well,
to
and he
Yeah.
hasn't been charged with insurrection,
Yeah.
and neither has any other J6 defendant.
Yeah.
So the whole insurrection narrative is a farce to begin with.
Yeah.
I mean, I think to the point, though, one of the things that I want people to know from this election or to think about is if you think that because Trump won an overwhelming victory, and this goes back to the ideological divide that we have.
Yeah.
If you think that just because Trump won overwhelmingly, that everybody has now learned their lesson,
Yeah.
that now Democrats are going to stop being hard left, and we're going to just stop talking about trans and kids and killing babies. That's not going to happen. People need to wake up and realize that when you're in the one thing I know for sure about people on the left is they believe
Yeah.
what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They are hardcore believers.
Yeah.
And the sad truth is that people on the right are squishy.
Yeah.
We kind of believe it,
Yeah.
right? We're more like, I just rather have good free market and some
Yeah.
low prices.
Mm-hmm.
But they're out there really fighting for what they believe in, and we've got to do the same. Not because we're against them, but because
Right.
we're for the Lord.
Yeah.
And it's our job to be salt and light in the world. And if there's any hope for America, it's going to be through the church.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And that will just lead into the next question there is, what do you think is next for the church? Because we know, and I believe a lot of people that watch our audience, Trump's not the answer. Government's not the answer. Christ is the answer. Well, if Christ is the answer, how do people know about Christ? It's the church. So what do you think is next as far as for the church?
Well, like Megan said to start with, I mean, the church has got to wake up and get in this thing. I mean, the sad reality is, George Barna, who's a noted Christian pollster, did a survey back in September among people of faith across the country and found that about 50% of evangelicals or people who consider themselves people of faith, and that can be any faith, not just Christian, were not planning to vote.
Yeah.
Now, if the people of God, right, and if you narrow it down even to specifically Christian evangelicals, if we're not going to participate in the process, then how do we hope to have a Christian nation?
Right.
How do we hope for people to live and breathe and see what is right, what is true, and what is good and is beautiful? And so it's up to us to be that light of the world. And I have been so disgusted in this cycle with the whole evangelicals for Kamala and all of these religious leaders coming out, and somehow, I have no idea, trying to tell me that voting for the person who is okay with baby killing up to the point of birth is the right way to go for people who follow Jesus Christ. I just don't understand that.
No.
I'm also sick to death of, like you said at the beginning, pastors who won't speak out on these subjects. The reality is that if pastors preach the full counsel of God from the Bible and talk about the issues that we deal with every day in our life, you wouldn't even have to tell people how to vote. It'd be obvious. But because we don't want to touch these issues, because we don't want to talk about trans and kids, we don't want to talk about abortion, we don't want to talk about marriage, we don't talk about any of these things that matter, then all of a sudden we're confused when everybody's left out of the political process. And the thing is that when we advocate the public sphere, the enemy goes, "Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll take it."
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And that's what happened. While we're not there, he's just running roughshod over everything.
You know where I think you were saying that, and I just, it kind of connected the dots in my head a little bit more because, the church, I don't think they know how to go after that because they have been, there's pastors that are only after their own personal agenda on how to advance themselves to become the next mega church or the next mega pastor with the biggest, audience on TV or YouTube or whatever it is these days. But I don't think that they truly know how to open a Bible and read it anymore because it's so self-help. Nothing, if you are, if you love Joel Osteen, whatever, but he is a self-help. He's not a pastor, in my opinion. And I don't think churches know how to do what the Lord tells us to do, and that's to humble ourselves and pray. I think there was maybe 20% of the church that actually prayed over our nation during this election process.
Well, think about this. Who in the past 6 months, from a nationally well-known pastor perspective, how many of those people were out front telling you, we need to pray, we need to vote for Trump, we need to not because Trump is the savior, but because his policies best align, not perfectly align. And I totally get the frustration. He absolutely, went soft on the life issue and all that. I get all that. I do. And I'm not for any of that. But my choice is the guy who helped end Roe v. Wade versus the woman who was considered the most liberal person in the Senate who is absolutely for baby killing up to the point of birth. Like, that's not even a choice. At least Trump's position is, hey, I left it to the states. If you don't like it in your state, then change it.
Well, I've had, and I call these people self-righteous lunatics because everybody wants to get on their high horse about righteousness to make it like politics are beneath me. I'm just to focus on building the kingdom. Well, and then everybody said, well, Trump I don't believe he's saved. Well, that's not up to you.
That's right.
And I'm not supposed to vote for my pastor. And, we need a more godly candidate. What if God himself in the Old Testament would have looked through with the children of Israel and at any point said, there ain't a godly one amongst none of them that's going to straighten out. I just can't do nothing. But yet you see time and time again, God used ungodly men. Why? Because they were more humble and not self-righteous. So they were willing, and that don't mean that means what? That they're willing to get in the ditches and work with the people to make a common good for everybody. And I said this the other week. I said, if Christians are not engaged in to me later, but, he talked about, we have to preach. And I understand that, but, sometimes preaching is less talking, more action. Because a lot of times I may not be preaching with words, but how I handle myself in situations. But the society has put us to where, Christians are supposed to just take the high road. No, I'm not. Sometimes I have to turn around and fight because why? There ain't no high road left. There's only a low road. There's not a road up there. I have to go. Sometimes that means I have to fight and I have to stand up for what's right. You know, so I believe we're going to begin to see the church. I believe God's Spirit, he said that there's going to be a move of his Spirit upon this earth. He prophesied that. And he said, in the last days, I'll pour out my Spirit, the former rain and the latter rain, all in 1 month. We don't know what season span he's talking with, God's months or not our months, but we know it's a short period of time. We know what the former rain looks like. We've seen that through the Bible. We don't know what the latter rain looks like. We can't describe it, but we've got to have preachers and lay people, body of Christ, believers that are willing to go, okay, God, I've never done this before and I've never seen this before, but if this is what you want, and then let people judge it by what? The fruits.
Yeah.
Well, and think about this. I mean, one of the things that just gets me, and that I think we as a church, and I'm going to say me too, because we're all a part of the body of Christ. The thing that we saw in this election that we have to sadly own, I'll put it that way, is that who has fought more for Christian values this past year than people who we're not even sure are Christians, like Donald Trump, like RFK Jr., Jordan Peterson, James Lindsay, Tucker Carlson.
Joe Rogan.
Yeah, Joe Rogan, Elon Musk.
I mean, these are people who, at best, depending on the person, right, are marginal believers, maybe new believers, all the way to people who are avowed atheists.
Yeah.
They're fighting harder against these culture war issues than the church is. Yes. That is a terrible indictment of the church. And the fact is, when it comes to the vote, if you look at the exit polls, white born-again evangelicals, and this is something I heard last night on one of the newscasts, it was at its lowest level. We were the lowest percentage of the vote since 2012. The point that's being made there is that could Trump have won the election without evangelicals voting? Of course not.
Right.
But were we the reason he won? We absolutely were not.
No.
I saw something, New York, at the Bronx, and there was like 2 other places in New York where most of the Bronx and those 2 other cities were Black and Latino men.
Yeah.
And your post that you put on the Freedom Network, men need to rise up and step up and start being the head of the home and being that father figure. And it struck me as very interesting that the Latino population and the Black, especially in the Bronx, the hood, that they saw something in Donald Trump that they wanted to fix. And I don't know. I found that very interesting going along with what you just said.
Yeah.
Well, I think this election kind of and again, this is, who knows what people were thinking in their head, but the numbers between Black males, Latino males, all of that, the fact that they shifted for Trump in big numbers.
Big numbers.
I mean, there were Latino groups that went majority for Trump, 50% or more.
Yeah.
And for Blacks, it was just larger percentages than what they had been. And then men overall was made up a larger percentage of the electorate this time around by like 3 points. So, and this is in North Carolina, but the bottom line is that I hope what we're seeing is a rejection of this sort of matriarchal rejection of God's established order type of thing. And hopefully men are going to step up. But again, they're only going to step up if the church disciples them too.
And that, that's something I've talked about before as well is, and you see it in the garden. Adam wasn't leading Eve. What happened? Satan stepped up. You see that in Israel. You see it as soon as the church, New Testament church was started, and you see it today. When man doesn't lead the way God called him to, whether it be the government, Satan will step in. The family, Satan will step in. The church, even the church, if man doesn't lead the way God's called us to lead, Satan says, I'll step in and lead. And say, you mean Satan's leading the church? Absolutely. A lot of churches. And why do I say that? That it has to be possible because Jesus said himself that he would look at people and say, depart from me, you workers of iniquity. I never knew you. And they're ever going, wait a minute. We laid hands on people in your name. We cast out demons in. No, you were doing it for ulterior motives. You had, like you said, people want that celebrity. I want to get the biggest church. I'd love to have a massive church. Why? Not because of Wesley, because I could look back and I would still be going, how can we reach more? How can we reach more? There's not enough churches in Stanley County now, and we got a bunch that if everybody if God moved on this county, every church here would be overfull.
Well, and I think to your point, what happens with the church next, I think it's going to go one or two ways. It's either going to continue to sift down to the true remnant, to the true believers.
Yeah.
So all of these fake churches, they will die out.
They'll die out.
Because people aren't going to keep up a charade, but for so long. So,
Yeah.
and you see that, and we got a lot of churches, but most of them are barely.
And you've seen some of it in COVID.
That's right. A lot of them are just hanging on. It's either going to go that way, or to your point, there could be a genuine revival, and we could see an explosion. I hope it's the latter.
Yeah.
But things are going to have to change.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. My biggest worry come this Sunday is that most pastors are going to wipe the sweat from their brow and say, whew, glad that's over. Now we can get back to normal.
Yeah.
If that's your view, you've missed the whole thing.
It's been proven when people are uncomfortable is when they seek out.
Yeah.
Right. You know, we saw that during COVID. When you're uncomfortable, you seek out a relief from wherever. And I think that's exactly what it is. We're either going to see the church just totally plummet. What I'm seeing, because, we're in the process of, we left a church in Charlotte and, we've just been seeking the Lord here and there. The Lord has not told us yet where we're supposed to be. I think you're going to start seeing little small groups popping up and small community because people just don't trust anymore.
Right. Yep, and that's the downfall of church leadership, because it's a shame that they're having to pull up small home groups, because when you look at it biblically, there has to be a covering. And sometimes God's going, okay, well, y'all are doing a crappy job covering, so I'm going to have to start something over here. But if men in the church, we've got to live lives that are enticing. In other words, we've got to bring masculinity back. I'm not scared to get in somebody's face. We've portrayed Jesus to be a dress-wearing sissy. Jesus was if you study Jesus, he was a bad dude. Yeah. He was strong. He didn't take junk off of the government. He'd get in their face and call them names. He fashioned whip, turned over tables, and run people out, and died on a cross. When they beat him, the beating he took should have killed him. It did to any other man that took that kind of beat. Yet he carried a cross. He's tough. Yeah. But we've got to you can be a Christian man and still be masculine. Yeah. You can still be that rough, tough guy that loves God. And when we do that, now that younger generation of males are going to look to us to go, I want to be like them. I want to be like they are. And then what does those young men learn how to what? Treat those young women. And it's the same for godly women. Be feminine, be a woman. You can be a woman and you don't have to wear dresses to your ankles and turtlenecks and no makeup. You can be attractive and beautiful, but be the way God created you. You're teaching the young daughters how to become godly women. The more godly we create people, the more benefit they are to our society and to our nation. Because as they're growing up, then they're getting in positions and they have a, like you said, biblical worldview versus what has MTV or VH1 or the latest celebrity, told us how we ought to live, and be. But last question, what's next for America with Trump in office? Your hopes, anyway.
I heard this meme today. I was reading. I saw several people sharing it where they walk outside and they can smell lower interest rates and
yes,
groceries don't cost so much. I have 3 boys. I think honestly, I don't know what's in store. I don't think any of us do because I think what we need to do as people is continue to humble ourselves. Continue to seek the face of the Lord and what direction he would have us go. And especially, if you're involved in local politics, stop going after your own agenda.
Yeah.
and start humbling yourself and saying, okay, Lord, what do you want me to do for my county? And my prayer is that God would start raising up more of those people to put their own agenda to the side and start saying, what do you want me to do to give back and to serve you? And because think about, if we want our county, if we want America to go in the right direction, it's going to start on a local level, and it's going to take churches and people that are in church getting involved in their local politics.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think very simply put, kind of like what Megan was saying, America's going to go as the church goes.
Yep.
That's the way it's always been, and that's the way it's always going to be. If we think that we're going to be a nation without God and everything's just going to be fine, I think we see how that turns out.
Yeah.
What has happened here in this election is that God has shown us unbelievable mercy.
Yeah.
And mercy, as we know, is unmerited favor.
Yep.
We didn't deserve this.
Right.
No.
We didn't deserve Trump to win. And even more than that, God has surrounded him with smart, sacrificial people who love the country, who love people, who want to make a difference. And like I said before, many of which who aren't believers.
Yeah.
Or like Vivek Ramaswamy aren't even Christians, right? Like they're Hindu or whatever. So, I mean, we've been given this, heavenly lifeline that God has heard the cries of people like us who have prayed. I told him I've never prayed more for the country and elected leaders than I have this year. And I believe God's heard those prayers. But now the question is what are we going to do with this opportunity? Because Trump being in office is not going to fix all our problems.
Right.
And we also need to know that the left is going to fight him every single step of the way. They're not going to just roll over and let him do whatever he wants to do.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a what some call a cold civil war. Right? It's not a hot war, but a cold war. And so that's going to be going on. And so I think for us, I've thought a lot about this question because to me it's like I know the church is key, but so now what do we do as the church? What if assuming we're ready to go, right? What are we ready to go do?
Yeah.
And obviously, the gospel is central to all of that, but do what with the gospel? And I think it goes back to our institutions. The left, the progressives, the Marxists, whatever you want to call it, right? The ungodly have taken the last 100 years and marched through our institutions and taken them all over. They own the schools, they own the media, they own the government, they own the sports, they own everything.
Everything.
Right? They control everything. And if we want the country to be different, we have to take those institutions back, or at the very least, create alternative institutions.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to where do you get your news, where do you send your kids to school, what do you do about this, you've got to find biblical worldview options, whether you have to build them or whether you find them, and you got to leverage them to the fullest. And because without that, we're not going to keep raising our kids in pagan schools and just have good Christian. Like that's not
it's
how
not going to happen. Huh?
That education is discipleship.
Yeah.
And we're not discipling believers.
Yeah.
And if I can add just real quick too, if there's somebody out there listening and they're like, well, I want to get involved in local politics. I want to get involved, but I don't know how. I mean, I couldn't have done anything if it wasn't for Jason and Amy Phibbs.
Right.
I'm serious when I say that, because I remember 3 years ago, almost 4 years ago, we were, talking about running, and I was like, I don't have a clue. I don't know. And they were like, well, we'll show you. Well, reach out to me. Reach out to Jason.
Yeah.
There's people out there that will help you to achieve that and show you what you need to do and teach you how to do certain things and where to go. Don't let something like that hold you back, because if I can do it as a nobody in this county, anybody can do it.
Right.
You just have to have a willing heart. You have to humble yourself and get your own agenda out of the way. And I believe the Lord's going to bless that.
Yeah. And that's, I believe, like we know the common thread is the church has to do its job. What the church does now determines what America does next. And that's the worst. This is the church does this in every, because I've grew up in it. The church will win a battle and go to sleep. Win a battle, go to sleep. The church didn't win this battle. Right. We didn't. God had, he had mercy on us. The church, it shows in the polling, we didn't even get out and vote. like we should. So we can't stop. It's not Trump got in office, let's go get in our glory land recliner we just bought and go watch a Netflix series.
Yep.
It's not, well, I've got time to go, I'm going to go focus on it. We've got to be on our face before God. And that's the thing, like where you talking about people seeking office. Ask God. God, do you want me to do this? I know talking with you, you prayed about this.
Yeah.
You know that God, and whatever God calls you to, he'll qualify you and equip you to do by putting people around you, like Jason and Amy and different ones, to say, this is how you need to do this.
Right.
We all have to do our part, you know. So I do believe, I believe America's best days are ahead of us. I believe, you know, I've said this all year, America shall be saved. We're not going to hell. We all but there. It's getting hot. But I believe, you know, and, you know, yes, I know in the Bible we have from Genesis to Revelations, some people can argue some in Revelations that there's some scriptures that kind of allude to the young cities, that one of them could be, you know, Great Britain or the United States. Irregardless, you cannot look at the founding of this nation from the time it started until now to do what we've done and say God's hand wasn't on it.
That's right.
But just because God's hand was on it, don't mean God's hand won't be lifted. Because the church, what? We went back to sleep. You know, so I believe that the remnant church is going to be, I believe that's something we're going to see over the next year or two. You're going to see, like you said, the fly-by-night churches, those churches that are, maybe right reasons, maybe they got a little bit more of the pride. God will either get the pride out or shut their doors. There'll be a church, but God's presence won't be there. And I believe you'll see that remnant rise up that's not going to be denominational. It's going to be more Holy Ghost is leading the way, and you've got hungry followers going, this is the direction we're going. Why? Because people are seeing the fruits. They're seeing lives changed, healings, salvations. You're seeing the fruit of what we're supposed to see in the church, and you're going to see people coming together and just going after it.
Well, just a quick story that I think illustrates a lot of what we're talking about. When we fought the drag show issue in Almond City last year, took a lot of work, worked with pastors, got a lot of people together, got people up at the meetings, filled up the meetings, did all of that. And we ended up losing 3-4.
Yeah.
And we walked away with that saying, you know what? All we got to do is flip one city council seat and everything will change. And I remember telling the pastors at that time, I said, okay, we lost. Now we got to make them pay for it.
Yep.
There's got to be a consequence if you won't change. And what happened? They ran Bob Groover, who was a node pastor, to give it, and he lost.
Yep.
And so what happens? People like Martha Sue Hall and Benton Dry, you know what they've learned? Nothing. They've learned they can do whatever they want, and they're going to be right there. That's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
You've got to have the follow through. There's got to be consequences for action, or people learn no lessons. We know this with our kids.
Yeah.
It's no different with adults.
And if you want to put a pastor in an office, and if that pastor wants to, put one in that is going to, that maybe sometimes people at some points question their salvation because they're not scared to get in people's faces and be real. Because you can sugarcoat and fluff it all day long, but it's like what we're making decisions on from local all the way to federal, they're life and death situations, what, for the next generation. You know, the decisions we make now are affecting our children and, you know, like now my grandchild. You know, that was the one thing that my grandson was born a little bit early, and I'm holding him at 36 weeks. I'm holding him. There's nothing wrong with this kid. He has, he's beautiful. I mean, he's perfect. Of course, I know I'm partial. He's mine. Every grandparent says that. But I'm looking at him, and at the same time, there's an anger rising up in me because I know that there's a party that's running for government, federal office that says it's okay to take this thing at this point and go, I don't want it, and throw it in a trash can or sell its parts off on a black market somewhere. That's demonic. I mean, you can't, you know, I've told people, I said, you can't vote for Kamala Harris and then start praying, thy will be done, thy kingdom come, thy will be done. You can't do that. So the church, we've got to stay on the track so that America can be what God's called it to. We're that last bastion of hope for the world. to push the gospel to every part of the world to say, hey, there's a Jesus and he loves you. If you'll accept him, you can go live in eternity. That's what we've got to get to. And, I don't believe it's not going to be pie in the sky and just a light flip on and everybody walk into glory. We're going to have some fighting. We're going to have some battles. We're going to have persecution, tribulation, trials, but there's a purpose behind it. And if God's called us to it, he's going to walk us through it, and there's blessing on the other side of it. So y'all got any last statements or y'all?
I'm good.
Well, it's always fun to have y'all. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Megan.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Guys, appreciate you tuning in. We love and appreciate each and every one of you. And remember, pray for this nation. Seek God if what you can do to help push the agenda of the biblical worldview back into our schools, back into our local governments, our state, all the way into our federal, so that America can be what God's called it to. Don't give up on this nation. America shall be saved. God's not done with us yet. I believe our best days are yet to come. Remember, hit that like button if you like what we've done tonight. If you watch this and say we're all crazy and lost our mind and you don't like it, hit the dislike button. But thank you for watching. If you did like it, go on the other side of the screen, hit the share button. Write in the caption on your social media why you think your friends should watch this video, and you never know. You sharing that could change somebody's life in the way they view. You could give them hope to face tomorrow. Guys, we love you. God bless you, and we'll see you next week.